I talk a lot about starting a webcomic, but I've never actually talked about the start of a webcomic. That is to say, what happens at the very first few pages of your webcomic? Do you just write whatever and then send it off into the abyss that is the internet? I mean, you can, but if you want to have a webcomic that's easily accessible to new readers, enticing to revisit, and just something to be dang proud of, well, stick around, I guess, because I'm about to ramble about it with my sore frickin' throat. Throat. I got tea, guys, so don't feel too bad for me. First things first, I'm going to narrow things down a bit here. When I'm talking about the beginning of a comic, I'm talking about, the first scene of your comic, not the first third, because, that's also a beginning, but it's kind of different. Whether your comic starts off with a prologue, in media res, or begins at the beginning, I'm talking about, what makes a first scene stick. Technically, you can start your comic anywhere, but you can also, drunkenly show up to, your sister's wedding, I guess, and anywhere between 10 and 1 a.m. But should you do that? It's probably not a good idea. Your first scene is very important. It's where you get to sit down with your reader and tell them what your story is going to be about and why they should stay. If they leave, it should be because this isn't their type of story. They shouldn't leave because you couldn't properly articulate why your story is awesome and they need to read it. The first scene is a microcosm of your webcomic. This is why stories don't always begin precisely at the beginning of the protagonist's struggle. Grander tales frequently begin with a glimpse into the larger world, epic scope, adventure, and they do this before they sit you down next to a boring protagonist and their humdrum life, and oh god, I wish there was so much more in my life, kind of thing. One of my favorite examples of this is Gurren Lagann. So consider Gurren Lagann and how it opens not with Simone living underground, but in a later moment out in space. Harry Potter begins with a prologue which offers you a glimpse into magic and implications of a larger scope. It doesn't just start with some kid living in a cupboard and being sad. Likewise, stories that remain small don't start with space battles. Why? Because imagine how disappointing it would be to start reading a comic about space battles and then it turns out just to be a slice of life. With a beginning scene that makes the wrong promises to your readers, you draw in the wrong readers and you turn away the ones that you do want. Basically, if you don't want to write about space battles, don't start with space battles. If your story is all about space battles, start with a space battle. This is why when you begin your comic, it's a good idea to at least have some sort of outline or idea where everything is headed. If you have no clue, don't fear. I usually don't have any clue either. But I've done pretty well despite this. I often start by writing out a list of cool things that I want to happen. I think out cool pages I want to see, feelsy moments I want the audience to react to, and this list quickly becomes my audience promise list. From these cool scenes and elements, I can extrapolate a more general list of promises. These are grander promises which shape the comic overall. What is the mood of the comic? What are some of the symbols? What are the main themes, the genre? The answers to these large questions answer what your comic is and therefore shape your opening scene. Let's run through a quick example to show you how this works. I mentioned Gurren Lagann, so let's start there. What is the overall mood? It's big, over the top, with a general sense of kick-assness. Does this translate in the first scene? Yes. Is there any symbols used? Yes. The very first image is the spiral. Theme? I'm not going to rewrite high school essays here, but the overall theme is introduced from the very first moment, and the genre is defined clearly with the final glimpse of the mecha, which ends the whole opening scene. Upon examination, you can also see another list of concrete promises. From the opener, you can see that we will follow Simone into adulthood, and that we're going to end up in a battle against the universe itself. And there's plenty of other notable bits of foreshadowing there as well. If Gurren Lagann isn't your thing, try this exercise with some of your own favorite comics, movies, and other forms of storytelling mediums. Their openings will share these same basic traits. If an ending was unsatisfying to you in a piece of media, try looking at the beginning. What promises did it start with? Were these promises fulfilled? My recent comic, The Magpie, begins in a flashback, but still foreshadows future events. I attempted to accomplish this by choosing a flashback that lines up with the mood, theme, and genre, as well as connecting it to the stranger elements which will dominate the story later. I could have been more effective in some parts, like establishing the relationship between the prologue and main story, but live and learn. What is the mood of my comic? Horrific and depressing. How do I show this? Monsters, crying, child beating. Symbols, yeah, they're kind of there. Theme, yes, I packed theme pretty tightly into the prologue, but it's about the same ratio as it goes on throughout the whole comic. And genre, if it isn't clear that this is a horror, well, you have a very interesting life. Other elements that I packed into the opening are the inclusions of monsters from my previous story, Pretty Mouth, which shows that these stories are in the same world. It also states that this comic will be full of monsters and you can expect conversations with them. And finally, the last page shows that this comic is brutal and mature. So when people's heads start exploding later down the line, my audience isn't like, what? I thought this was a romance. And then they're mad at me. But I also include kissing early on so that they know that there is kissing. So if they're more put off by kissing than exploding heads, they're good there too. Anyways, and all of this is just the basics of story promises. Your visuals also imply tons of things to your reader. Is this a gag strip or narrative? The page layout speaks volumes to that. What does your art style choices say about the questions of theme, tone, and genre? And while it all can get really overwhelming, remember that you aren't perfect. And in an imperfect beginning to an imperfect comic is perfectly acceptable because again, it's a promise to the reader. You're promising, hey, this is my first comic, and it shows. I hope that helped. Go forth now and start your comic. And if you've already started your comic, try looking at your first scene and see what you've promised through it. And if you haven't even published this first scene, ask someone you trust about it. See where they think things are going. And if they're way off base, then maybe it's time to rethink your opening a bit. Anyways, my voice is dying now. Thank you for watching. Blah blah blah. Ending credit stuff. Like, subscribe and I guess. Bye.